Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the joint Carnegie Endowment and Cyberspace Solarium Commission event on countering threats to critical infrastructure. I am absolutely delighted to be here today with a distinguished group of panelists to discuss the current landscape of cybersecurity threats to critical infrastructure, perspectives from government and the private sector on the progress that has been made so far in improving critical infrastructure resilience, as well as the work that remains to be done. Here with me today is Representative Jim Langevin, U.S. Representative from Rhode Island and the co-founder and co-chairman of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, as well as a commissioner on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Sherry McGuire, Chief Technology Officer of SWIFT and a non-resident senior fellow here at the Carnegie Endowment. And Tom Fanning, Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Southern Company and a commissioner on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Some very brief administrative notes before we begin. I will be moderating the first portion of the discussion between the panelists. Then I'll shift to asking the panelists questions coming from you, the audience. So please do submit your questions into the chat as the discussion is ongoing. Now, without further ado, let's kick off this discussion. And I'm going to start by turning it over to Congressman Langevin. Congressman, the public is certainly feeling the impact of cyber threats to critical infrastructure like never before. As a commissioner on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and as co-founder of the Cybersecurity Caucus in the U.S. Congress, and as a well-respected leader on cyber policy across both aisles, can you tell us what is at stake here and what is being done now?
Well, Erica, thanks for that, the introduction, and great to be with everyone today. And I'll start by saying, I used to sleep a lot better at night before I had this job. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, I guess, but these are obviously very important topics. And let me just say, I want to start out by just thanking the Carnegie Endowment and you in particular for organizing today's event. I'm really looking forward to a lively discussion about cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure, and really thrilled to be a part of, and really humbled to be part of this panel. Be with my fellow commissioner Tom Fanning, and Tom was so incredibly helpful, and his insights were invaluable throughout the whole Solarium Commission process to help us understand the private sector critical infrastructure perspective. And also, of course, to be with Sherry McGuire, who's been a real leader in cybersecurity strategy and the policy space now for decades. And I also, of course, note that Erica is also a Solarium alumnus and was a vital contributor to the commission's work as a senior director and leader of Task Force One. So thank you, Erica, for your contributions to the Solarium project and our final report. So I'll start off by saying that I'm very proud of what we've accomplished together in this whole Solarium process, and I believe much of the Solarium Commission's work ties directly to addressing the issues that we've gathered to discuss today. And but I guess before I get ahead of myself, your first question addressed the stakes of securing critical infrastructure. So in my view, these stakes have never been higher than they are right now, and I think they're going to continue to get higher as we go forward. Unfortunately, the cyber threats to government networks and to our nation's critical infrastructure operators are growing rapidly. I know Tom is seeing that every day, and just this year, cyber attacks, as we've have witnessed, have compromised the functionality of fuel pipelines, of food processors, water treatment facilities, and we've seen hospitals and police departments, even municipalities being affected by these things. So we are now painfully aware right now of how debilitating these attacks on our critical infrastructure can be, and unfortunately, the threat is not going away anytime soon. So I would say, unfortunately, we can expect that our critical infrastructure will continue to be targeted by state and non-state adversaries well into the future. And so on that, score, it's absolutely critical that we work really hard to improve both the security and the resiliency of our critical systems. So, in other words, I'd say we have to I guess what I would say is make it more difficult for our adversaries to compromise our critical infrastructure in the first place, and also ensure that in the case of a compromise, that we can restore operations as quickly as possible. So, I think we all have come to the conclusion that we're never going to be able to, with 100% certainty, ensure that the bad guys and the bad actors are never going to get in. They're going to get in, and we've got to make it hard for them to operate. We've got to make it ensure that we can recover quickly, reconstitute, get things back up and running in network speed, if you will, as quickly as possible. So, this is a tall order. There's no two ways about it. But I have to say I've been encouraged by the progress that we've made since the creation of the Solarium Commission in 2019. More than 25 cyber-related provisions, but just by way of example, were included in last year's National Defense Authorization Act. We had great bipartisan support on these provisions. Many of these will have direct benefits to the cybersecurity of our nation's critical infrastructure, and we should be very proud of that. Just notable highlights include, and I'll I'll yield back after this, but the creation of the new office of the National Cyber Director in the White House. Chris Inglis, our former commissioner, was named by President Biden as the first Senate-confirmed National Cyber Director. There's one of the real glaring kind of pieces to the puzzle for strengthening our cyber defense that was missing. We now have a head coach on the playing field, if you will, pulling things together. Also, the codification of the roles and responsibilities of sector risk management agencies is something else we were able to include, and the requirement for a new joint cyber planning office, and this is at CISA. So these measures I know will help, but much more work really does. It remains to be done, and I'm grateful, first of all, to President Biden for his leadership. It's been really heartwarming, inspiring to see how seriously he's taken this issue. And this is my fourth presidential administration that I've been working with or dealing with, and I can say unequivocally that President Biden has done more for cybersecurity in his first 8 months in office on the job than any of his predecessors. And that says a lot. So he's also brought together a terrific team. I already mentioned Chris Inglis, the first National Cyber Director, Jen Easterly as the Director of CISA, and then Ann Neuberger, who was the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber. All top, just top talents that we have at the helm there. So I'll just wind up by saying that I'm excited to speak today about our plans to build on our existing achievements, and then to continue the efforts to safeguard our critical infrastructure from cyber threats going forward. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for setting the stage so eloquently on sort of the landscape of where we've been and where we're going in the future. Turning to you, Tom, you also serve as a commissioner on the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, as well as serving as chairman, president, and CEO of Southern Company, one of the largest energy providers in the United States. And so from your vantage point, what do you see as working, and what do you think needs to be improved?
Yeah, I go back a little bit in history. When the Solarium Commission was originally put together, was actually under Dwight Eisenhower, post-World War II. And the whole idea back then was, if you just looked at a map, you kind of had to your right the Soviet Union, and to the left essentially NATO. And the model of conflict was essentially a tank battle on the plains of Poland. It's very clear today that that conflict is on our telecommunication networks, our electricity grids, our financial systems, and anywhere else the bad guys can get to. the old dogma of being able to have as a defensive barrier 2 oceans and 2 friendly neighbors, north and south, just doesn't play anymore. And so when I think about the battlefields being predominantly owned by the private sector, 87% theoretically of the critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector, we really must reimagine the relationship between the federal government and the private sector in protecting our national security. And that's one of the things that I've been so excited about. I have been running around for a few years prior to the Solarium Commission, and I think many people thought I had 3 6s on my forehead in the private sector, thinking, well, what does all this mean? I think, and when I walked in the halls of Congress, and I've been so happy to work with Jim Langevin and Gallagher and Angus King. I mean, they've been great guys, and I've always characterized the work of the commission not really as bipartisan, but nonpartisan. This is an issue where I think everybody gets it, but I think it is so hard to pinpoint for so many people. What does it mean and what should we do? I remember I was on Maria Bartiromo's show once, and I just kind of described it to her like this. I said, Maria, it's like you and me going out on a beach. And I said, Maria, look at the giant submarine battle going on out there. We know there's ongoing lethal conflict, but all we see is the open ocean until something cataclysmic happens, and then we all react. What we have to do here, and what this commission has done, is create a common vision about some principles about a way to better protect America. And I know we'll get into that in our conversation today, but I am so proud that I think the Solarium Commission so far has been so effective in putting out its work product, and in fact, getting a lot of it into law. And in fact, there's more efforts to continue that process. So I think we are making a difference. It does represent, I think, a blueprint of national security for America that in many ways is totally different than the dogma this nation has relied on for so many years.
Thanks, Tom. I think both you and Congressman Langevin mentioned the concept of cyber resilience, which has really become something of a buzzword in this field. So I'd like to turn over to Sherry for this question. Sherry, you were recently appointed as Chief Technology Officer of SWIFT. You've also served as the Group Chief Information Security Officer at Standard Chartered before that. So reflecting on your experience, how's the financial services industry in particular seeing the evolution of this concept of cyber resilience, which is something that we're all sort of talking about right now?
Yeah, well, thanks, Erica. And also my thanks to the Carnegie Cyber Policy Initiative and the Cyberspace Solarium Commission for hosting this important discussion today. Happy to be here with you, Congressman Langevin, and also Tom. First, maybe what I'll start with is, for those that aren't aware, who SWIFT is. SWIFT stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. And we are the financial industry's trusted and neutral infrastructure provider that enables our cooperative of more than 11,000 financial institutions to move value around the world reliably and securely. So cyber resilience, when we talk about that as a term, as a buzzword, is really a foundation to how we operate today, is fundamental to the service that we provide, and is at the heart of our core financial messaging platform, as well as ensuring that we can enable instant and frictionless end-to-end transactions globally amongst our financial institution members. So over the past several years, of course, the concept of cyber resilience has become much more pronounced and is, I think, reaching some maturity level around definition across the financial services sector, both private and public, regulatory bodies and others. This has really accelerated, I would say, in light of how the cyber threat landscape has really continued to evolve in its scope, scale, and the impacts, as we've seen, especially over the last year. And this is especially true as we are all faced, especially in private sector, and I guess that goes for government too, with major technology transformations that are becoming nearly ubiquitous. with the desire as well as the need to shift to cloud and other digital solutions to meet customer demands for speed and agility. So I would say that the financial sector has been meeting this challenge head on. We have certainly accelerated our efforts over the last several years with significant initiatives around commonly recognized frameworks, standardization, control testing, exercises, information sharing, individual and sector-wide risk assessments that really are intended to look more deeply into dependencies and systemic risks and how we as a sector address those holistically and really achieve what that end objective is of cyber resilience. So I think these are just some of the things that I look forward to sharing a little bit more about during the discussion today of what some of those initiatives have been, as well as perhaps what might be applicable to other critical infrastructure sectors as they are continuing to mature some of their views on what it means to be cyber resilient.
Thanks so much, Sherry. So sort of pivoting off of that, let's dive into a discussion about how we can move forward on making our systems more cyber resilient. And Tom, I'll turn it over to you for this one. As Sherry alluded to, the rapid digital transformation of critical infrastructure, as well as the evolving and growing nature of the threat environment, is making it hard in some ways to determine what needs the most attention. So what's your perspective on how we should identify what counts as the most systemically important critical infrastructure? How do we know what's truly critical in critical infrastructure?
You bet. So SICI is the unfortunate acronym for this, right? Systemically important critical infrastructure. There's already been a lot of good work that's been done at CISA, and it really goes to the idea of not thinking about critical infrastructure in a stovepipe or in a silo, but rather thinking about it in terms of a delivery of a product. For example, what is required in order to do digital financial payment systems? What is going to be required in order to deliver an electron? It's not just the transmission system. It's not just the generation. It's the fuel supply. For example, natural gas pipelines or whatever. So the idea is in thinking about not in terms of the 16 industrial segments as was originally defined, but rather thinking about systems of delivery of critical infrastructure. And so I think we've already made great start there. The second thing is to say, let's evaluate the importance of that infrastructure. Let's not try and boil the ocean, but rather, in essence, create a triage evaluation for America. What are the most important, say, 50 to 100 things we can do? And then identify the assets. So I think we got to go down to the asset level. See, the former idea that we've had is that there are companies that are involved in Section 19 kind of efforts. Let's think about the actual asset paths and what we have to do to protect those. And when you get down to that level, you will understand very quickly that the nature of protection and resilience, which is exactly the right point, is different for every asset. And so you've got to get down at that level. Let's start there. And we identify, therefore, what is systemically most important. The second thing then is establishing those assets are the crown jewels of the American economy, or those assets which will protect human life, or those assets that will enable us to see, to listen, and defend ourselves. Those are kind of the three criteria. Then what we do is join as an aspiration in a real-time joint collaborative environment where the intelligence community, our sector-specific agencies, the private sector, and the folks that will hold the bad guys accountable, whether that's DOD, FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Cyber Command, all join together to illuminate first the battlefield in real time so we can all see what's happening as it happens. It won't require sharing. At the SICI level, we will have a joint obligation to be able to look at the battlefield and react to it. The second thing is there is a benefit and burden to that. It's going to require different behavior on the part of the private sector, and really different behavior with folks like the intelligence community and a variety of other things. So those are the first two most important steps, I would say. That is joined responsibility for evaluating what's happening in the cyber threat world. Secondly, a joined obligation to react to what's happening and to share immediately back and forth. At that point, it doesn't require a sharing mechanism for me to pick up the phone and call somebody at DOE or call somebody at CISA. We all would know what's happening at the same time. Build from there. Last thing I'll just say, this idea of resilience is so important. Companies like mine, and we're one of the largest in the world, frankly, at what we do, get attacked on the average 3 million times a day. Now, many of those are punks, thugs, and criminals. What we have to do in this idea of SICI is protect against the existential threat first. Obviously, America has an interest in protecting everybody, but in a very special way, focusing on things that will obviate the existential threat is what we must start with.
Please, yes, Congressman.
If I could just build on what Tom just outlined there. And first of all, you can see what I meant when I said, Tom's contributions to Solarium were invaluable, especially obviously helping us to get our arms around how we relate to and interact with critical infrastructure, and helped us, to bring us along to create this concept of systemically important critical infrastructure. And, I was one of the ones that early on, I thought, Tom and I would be at loggerheads because I really thought we needed to require more of critical infrastructure, and I thought it was going to come on say the regulatory side. And what Tom really helped us to really see is that he not only wants us to be there with to understand what's going on inside critical infrastructure, but to be there jointly so that we can see in real time, as he says, the threats that are things that are happening, and the intrusions, and how we then work together very quickly to mitigate these problems. So that led to obviously the joint collaborative environment. But just looking back, early on, the concept of Section 9 was created to identify what was supposed to be the key areas of critical infrastructure. And that was a good start, but it was really insufficient for two major reasons. It doesn't, for example, include cloud service providers, and it did not have follow through from the government, either in terms of security requirements for owners and operators of Section 9 entities, or provide them with prioritized assistance. So the concept of SICI is different, and that cloud service providers would be included on the list of SICI entities. SICI entities would be subject to new requirements, but it would be risk-based cybersecurity performance standards. There'd be cyber incident reporting requirements, but SICI entities would also receive a number of benefits, and that's access to better intelligence to improve threat awareness, and also liability protections for damages from a cyber attack if they complied with the requirements expected of them. This new kind of social contract, as I think Tom has coined that phrase, and others. So the Commission on Homeland Security, the Committee on Homeland Security, I can tell you right now, which I serve, is looking closely at a codification of systemically important critical infrastructure. And we hope to actually be having a hearing on the SICI bill that could hopefully by around November. So I just wanted to add those things in. But
hey, let me throw one more in, Jim, that you and I work together on a lot. It's the idea of leveraging things like Sarbanes-Oxley. You have to interpret a control environment in order to assure you have accurate financial records, disclosures, et cetera. I think where we came together was, hey, let's think about a level of cyber hygiene appropriate with your SICI mission, if you will, that would also have to be signed off on by the CEO, the CFO, and the board of directors. I think once you get inside the boardroom, this idea of ignorance is no defense against the realities that we're all facing out there. People have to think differently about how to protect our national security, and the private sector has to adopt that reality.
Yeah, well said. Agree.
Sherry, did you want to chime in? I saw you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I think this topic of common standards and frameworks is just so critical to how we approach identifying what are systemically important assets and systems. It's clear that organizations really need to keep evolving their cyber risk management frameworks in line with how attackers' approaches are evolving. I can say that what we were looking at from a risk assessment 15 years ago has evolved quite significantly to what we look at today. And the community overall needs to maintain its strength in working together, identifying those new tactics, sharing information, building new defenses, and in particular, sharing cyber threat intelligence data is really crucial for organizations to protect themselves against cyber attacks. But I would be remiss if I said that information sharing alone was the panacea. It is not. Organizations have to do the hard work. They need to apply new standards and processes and approaches to be able to manage these frameworks over the long term in effective, compliant, and of course, we're running businesses. They have to be cost-efficient ways as well. So I want to just maybe mention along these lines what SWIFT implemented in 2016 across the financial services sector with our 11,000 cooperative members. And that was the SWIFT Customer Security Program, or the CSP. And this was really to help our customers ensure that the security of their SWIFT-related payment infrastructure was secure, and that they could defend against, detect, and recover from cybercrime and cyber attacks, the real definition of resiliency. The CSP and its associated customer security control framework is now very well established. It is continuing to innovate. It delivers tangible results. It helps our financial institution members raise the bar on their payment system security. And it includes cyber risk management support, data sharing, common standards. And I think one really important piece is attestation and independent assessment. So going back to what you were saying, Tom, about, there's got to be a senior person within the company that is attesting and being held accountable that those systems are secure. And then it's followed by various audits to do that independent assessment to make sure that those attestations are really holding up. It is one of the largest programs of its kind in the world today, and it is one of, I would say, only a few global programs that is mandatory for companies like ours and our customers. And it's something that I think from a model perspective, really, we can look at the transferability and potential scalability, of course, in its own form to potentially other critical infrastructure sectors as well.
Thanks, Sherry. So, we've talked about how to define critical infrastructure and what counts as critical infrastructure, but sort of moving beyond just definitions and enduring challenges, how, we can sort of operationalize that, how the private sector and the government can actually do a better job of defending together. And certainly, at least within the US, there has been some great progress made, as a number of our panelists have alluded to, in improving how the government collaborates with the private sector, but there's also room for more improvement. And Congressman Langevin, I'll turn to you first for this question, and then Tom, I'll turn to you for your thoughts and feedback. What else needs to happen to improve collaboration, and also what can we learn from past attempts at doing this?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite recommendations here too, with which is to create the joint collaborative environment. We just talked about SICI, this systemically important critical infrastructure. So those are the companies, just to conceptualize it, that if they're attacked, it's not just say that and they go down. It's not that just the company having a bad day, it's the country having a bad day. So we saw that, for example, with Colonial Pipeline. So those companies, we want to have this new social contract, and we would have them working more closely together in what we creating the joint collaborative environment. So, again, it's a way for the public-private collaboration to improve, and that's through that establishment, that JCE. And again, it's one of my primary legislative goals that is remaining for the remainder of this year that I'll be heavily focused on. But it's all well and good, for information sharing between public and private sectors on cyber threats. And Sherry mentioned this too. But however, information sharing and any subsequent analysis of that information is going to be substantially less effective without, for example, a common tool set for analyzing cyber data from different sources and enterprises. And entities need to be able to make sense of the data coming from different sources around the cyber ecosystem. And here, JCE would basically provide an environment for analyzing information on cyber threats, cybersecurity risks, and malware forensics. And it would also provide a tool set in a cloud environment that public and private sector stakeholders would use collaboratively to analyze that data. So JCE would be I believe a great benefit to private sector partners who I believe should be among the owners and operators of systemically important critical infrastructure. And they're seeing this in real time. And so the question we ask is, how do we get this done? Well, I would argue that we do it by including it in this year's National Defense Authorization Act. We had great success there before. I'm confident about JCE's prospects in the NDAA. We were able to get it in the NDAA the last time. We had some problems on the Senate side. There was some, I think we're almost at I think we're at probably like the 5-yard line. And then there was some unanswered questions that still need to be addressed on the Senate had concerns there. But I think we're going to fare much better this time. But so, again, we've had successes there before, and we've included requirements for the creation of both an integrated cyber center and joint cyber planning office in last year's NDAA. So, those were I'm feeling very, very confident in those areas. Let me just also talk about just mentioning the Joint Cyber Planning Office and the Integrated Cyber Center. These three entities, the JC, the ICC, and the JICPO, sound like alphabet soup, but they're all pieces of the same puzzle that we're trying to really to put together, and which is how to unify public and private cyber defense efforts. In practice, I guess you'd say, it looks like the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, or JCDC, which was newly created by Director Easterly for this exact purpose. The JCE can provide the essential superstructure housing the JCE, the Integrated Cyber Center, and the JICPO, and wrapping the planning, the defense operations, and information fusing functions together under one roof, I think could significantly benefit the United States overall, the overall cybersecurity and resilience of the United States. So I think we're moving in a really good direction there. The NDAA is going to be a critical component for getting more of these things across the finish line, but I'm optimistic.
Tom, I think you're on mute.
I couldn't agree more. I think the work that Jim and others have done in the legislative front have been just fantastic. I hope this commission goes down as one of the most successful ever in that regard. The other thing I would just add that fits very well into this kind of bridge we're building between the private sector and the federal government is this idea that the resilience aspect of fighting a cyber war still has a big leg in the physical world. Let me give you a quick example. So the crown jewels of the electricity sector, I've been helping lead the electricity sector. I guess I'm in my 8th year now. It's not really a nuclear plant per se or something like that. It really deals with power management systems. Southern Company's big enough. We're about the size of the nation of Australia. Not that big, but about that size. And we control a lot of the power flows across the Southeast, just ourselves. If you could get into that, you could disrupt all sorts of things on the Eastern Seaboard, all the way to New York City, et cetera. So we have the things you would expect to see. We have a power management system somewhere, and we have another one located somewhere else, and they're hidden and they're resilient against all sorts of attacks, including, these bombs that would set off problems for all kinds of electronics. We have found that our Achilles heel will be telecom. So we've put in place measures that in the near term, if both of those got taken out, we could still run the electricity system. We call it spare tire. It's just like what you think. From the point of the accident, it would get you to a gas station on time. So, it'd be a rough ride. We'd have voltage swings. We'd have problems, but we'd be able to survive for a matter of time. Okay, let's call that spare tire. The last one says, I don't trust anything anymore. I've got to unplug from the digital age, and I don't trust telecom. So we call that MacGyver. And we have, in fact, a way through MacGyver to return the operation of the electricity grid to what it was in the 1950s when the internet didn't exist. There again, I've got to be able to communicate with somebody trying to throw a switch in a transmission station in South Alabama somewhere. And so we've got to get really creative about, tin cans and balls of string being able to chat with these folks. But that also fits with the mission of CISA. There is a physical link tied to the cyber link. And that's another reason why we've got to have this joint collaborative environment. There is a great deal of synergy in understanding not only the intelligence, the action and reaction by the private sector. The guys that will hold the bad guys accountable can get proactive. The intelligence community and understanding how we run our business will be better able to direct their intelligence gathering efforts and be more effective in their jobs. The sector-specific agencies, especially with a role like Chris Inglis, will have a unified approach to how we think about interacting from a regulatory standpoint. And one last comment about regulation. I think regulation is necessary, but it needs not to be fixed. In other words, like the 60 lava lamps, right? It's just like these threats and the attack vectors and the defense always moves and morphs over time. And we always have to do the old Wayne Gretzky skate to where the puck will be. Where are the bad guys trying to go? Well, that's not a photograph that we took a week ago and says, well, that's sufficient. We always have to kind of understand how the threats are evolving and try and build ourselves there. But regulation by its nature will breed a philosophy of compliance, and that is absolutely insufficient to the job at hand. We can't rely on just regulation. That's why collaboration, not cooperation, not sharing, collaboration must be the way we go forward in these vehicles.
Thanks, Tom. And, we've spent a good portion of this discussion talking about how to secure critical infrastructure in the United States for good reasons. But the reality is that this challenge isn't just an American one, it's an international one. And so, Sherry, I'd like to turn it over to you for this question. You're a technology executive for, in a world of the financial services sector, which has a global footprint. I'm curious, what partnerships or innovative regulatory approaches are you seeing emerge in the global financial system that other critical infrastructure sectors should watch? And sort of more generally, how should we be thinking about this challenge from an international perspective, not just from a US perspective?
Yeah, so first I just have to say, Tom, I love that you all named a program MacGyver. I just think that's just fantastic. Maybe we need to take a lesson in financial services and get more creative with some of the naming conventions that we have. But to get to your point, Erica, from an international standpoint, maybe I'll talk first about some of the activities or initiatives that are going on here in the United States, and then I can talk at some length about what we're seeing internationally, because I think certainly in the U.S. we have quite a few initiatives that are being adopted on a global basis, but there's also some pretty innovative and creative work that's happening overseas as well. One area that I would like to mention is the ARC, or the Analysis and Resilience Center, and I know the electric sector has recently joined these efforts as well, that were originally hatched in the financial services sector. And I think it's a really great initiative and great example of the way that critical sectors need to really work closely together to identify systemic risks and key critical dependencies. But the financial services track within the ARC, the work today is really focused on the development and enhancement of a financial services risk register. This risk register allows members to prioritize risks that pose systemic threats to market stability. So to Tom's earlier point, what are the big things that could really impact our ability to conduct worldwide business that everyone is so reliant upon? Members can select and execute systemic risk initiatives from the ARC's inventory, and then they can map these against their own internal systems and critical functions, and then adopt actionable operational resilience measures to both mitigate the impacts of potential market disruptions and oversee their overall risk posture and risk appetites more effectively. Well, that's one thing that I will mention, because I think this is quite applicable and frankly transversal across a number of other sectors. There's another, a longstanding initiative, of course, is with the FSISAC, the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, a longstanding public-private partnership working across industry and government. And that is truly now evolved from a US-based initiative to being global, with centers in Asia, Europe, here in the United States, with global connectivity to share information and give that heads up early warning, if you will, across threats that are materializing and that could have systemic disruption across our markets. On the regulatory front, I think there's quite a lot of work going on from a global standpoint. When we look at the United Kingdom, for example, threat-led control testing through the CBEST program, which is really about threat-led intrusion detection and controls testing that most financial services that are critically important within the United Kingdom have to adhere to. And that creates, I think, a very important check against the controls that we are operating in the financial services system and how well we can withstand certain types of intrusions and attacks. Those same types of testing regimes are happening across Singapore and Hong Kong and the UAE and within Europe. And I think the challenge with that, of course, is the proliferation of testing regimes and lack of perhaps unity amongst them can sometimes be a bit burdensome, especially for large global financial institutions. But again, I think the intent there is one that is helping organizations raise their overall security bar. There's also new exercise regimes that we are seeing in Europe with the Tiber exercises, which go to a cross-sectoral view of critically systemic and important infrastructures. And then we are seeing a number of various cloud security frameworks also developing across the financial services regulatory landscape. In particular, though, I would like to call out that work is really happening in collaboration with the industry, not just with financial services, but also with the technology industry, to ensure that we are building in, I think, the right levels of controls and framework insights that we really need. And I would be, of course, remiss as an unresident scholar here with Carnegie if I did not mention the work that was done in public-private partnership over the past year and a half to develop the international strategy to better protect financial system against cyber threats that was done in partnership with the World Economic Forum. And that has really been, I think, a thought leadership piece to try to drive a number of important initiatives across cyber norms and operational resilience and capacity building and workplace infrastructure that is continuing to be driven forward. I know, Erica, by you and members of your team. There's also another really important piece, I think, that's important for board member education. We can't forget that piece. That is still a component, even though many board members are now much more, I would say, educated and aware of the cyber threat and the risks associated with it as a business risk. But there's still a lot of education to be done out there. And Carnegie did release, I believe it was in the fall of 2019, a toolbox checklist for board members, very simple way to look at and understand the various types of cyber risks that board members should be looking at. And again, that was in sponsorship with the World Economic Forum, the SWIFT Institute, Standard Chartered Bank, the IMF, and the Global Cyber Alliance. And that's been refreshed in the last 6 months. And I think it's important to call out those types of public-private partnership, really useful toolkits, frameworks that are continuing to be developed, because those are the things I think that ultimately give the insights and the education where we need it most across the industries.
Thanks, Sherry. And actually, we have a question that came in from the audience that's sort of very relevant to the topic we've been discussing. So I have a question about ransomware that I'm excited to ask you all, but I'm going to pause for a moment and take this question because it gets at some of the challenges of the international dimension of securing critical infrastructure. So the question is, how do we protect infrastructure that is physically located in another country? So, for example, a server in Europe that serves customers in the US. And this question is for any of the panelists. And as a reminder, if you're in the audience, we only have a few minutes left. So I have a few other audience questions, but if you have a pressing question, please put it in the chat now. So how do we grapple with this challenge of infrastructure that's important, that's physically located in another country?
Well, maybe I'll try to jump in on that one first. I think it's not that much different than trying to secure your infrastructure within a country. I mean, we have global networks. We're operating both in physical locations and now with cloud infrastructure. And the most important things are to ensure that we are putting the right controls in place, and I could go on and name the list of, multi-factor authentication and good security software, and putting in the right control testing and having the right frameworks to check against, making sure that you have a rigorous compliance and testing program, that you're adopting the latest security patches, that you have good identity and access management processes. I mean, I could kind of, continue the good hygiene responses of what you need to secure infrastructure. And that is the same regardless of whether or not it is sitting in another country or not. I think where the challenge comes in is that sometimes, especially with cloud adoption, that it's sometimes more challenging when you are managing both legacy on-premises infrastructure and infrastructure that is in the cloud to make sure that you are putting in the right configurations and controls around APIs and other ways that you're connecting your infrastructure together. So that is, I think, in the most simplistic terms, you have to continue to do all the things that you would do in country if you have infrastructure in another location as well.
If I could offer a wee bit of a different perspective, from an intelligence standpoint, we operate under the guise of the 5 Eyes, right? And while that's very helpful, it's been a great institutional structure for us, good dogma. It's insufficient in picking up what's going on worldwide and where the threats are emerging. So I think somehow we need to broaden that concept in terms of threat analysis and figuring out who the bad guys actually are. Second would be the idea that the attacks and therefore the reaction to the attacks can move through assets of countries that may agree with us, may not agree with us, and our ability to defend ourselves may mean that we take action on assets that have no allegiance to the United States. Those are very sticky issues, but I think they're important. So I would say the geopolitics and kind of the intelligence gathering efforts are very unclear at this point. I think we do a pretty good job where we do them. Where we don't do them, I think there's a whole lot more thinking and behavior shaping, which is also one of the pillars of the work, that we need to get established in the diplomatic community across the world, frankly, even with our enemies.
Erica, we're in that question that was posed now from the audience goes to the heart of the argument that I have made for years now, that cybersecurity is not just a U.S. problem or challenge. Yeah. It is a international problem challenge. And so it's more important than ever that, we look at this in terms of the need to work more closely with partners and allies more than ever before. And this does have a strong international component. Tom just alluded to one of our pillars, which was the first one, which is shaping behavior. And that requires, establishing norms of behavior and holding accountable those who violate those norms or that enable the violation of those norms. And I'll just add, just a little added perspective that this is an area where the United States, especially over the previous 4 years, had stepped back from international engagement with partners on cyber. In fact, the position at the State Department was eliminated. That was an ambassador-ranked cyber security level position. So we've called for the creation of a bureau at state and led by an ambassador rank individual on cybersecurity to represent not only the U.S. interests on the international stage, but also to partner with partners and allies on the international stage on strengthening our cybersecurity and identifying threats and working together collaboratively to mitigate the threats, but hold bad actors accountable.
And I'll just give you one more quick example. I was invited to come. We had done all this work in electricity. I was come to speak at Parliament at the UK, and to talk about the models we had developed here domestically. And my idea was, hey, let's just do it with the EU. Let's have something like this at the EU. From an intelligence community standpoint, that would not fly. It would for the 5 Eyes. So we really do, I think, to Jim's point, need to really broaden our notion of how to shape behaviors, how to hold people accountable, and at least create a predictable interaction with friends and foes about how we're going to treat this landscape.
Thanks, Tom. And we're already with only about 5 minutes left. So we have several questions from the audience. I think we'll only have time for one more question very briefly, and then I'll turn it to you all for some last thoughts. So our final audience question is, How is the introduction of 5G expected to change the threat landscape for critical infrastructure? And I think broadly, as technology changes and the environment we've seen is so dynamic, how is that changing how we think about the resilience of critical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to something I said earlier, really. You could use 5G as an example, but there's going to be, AI as it evolves, quantum computing as it evolves. All of these things will change the landscape, change the speed of action and reaction over time. That's why you can't just rely on a standard or on a regulation that is fixed. We always have to be flexible with respect to our actions in the future.
Yeah, well said. I think all those things, all those technologies. There's a commercial on TV right now that says that the world is going to change more in the next 10 years than it did in the last 100, and that's because of all these amazing technologies that are coming onto the scene, bursting onto the scene. Everything from AI to quantum, and I don't know if the world is ready for what's coming, but it's coming, whether we like it or not. And so, to be aware of the challenges and work hard to adapt and lead is really important.
Thanks, Congressman. So I think we're almost at the conclusion of our panel. I want to give all of you a brief opportunity to share any last thoughts that you weren't able to share during our discussion. So, Congressman, I'll turn it over to you. Any last thoughts, and then to Sherry, and then to Tom for the last word.
Well, first of all, thanks for the discussion and the platform to talk about these very important issues. And I've enjoyed the conversation as I've had many other times working, especially with Tom and Sherry. Great to be with you as well. So thank you for all the contributions that you are all making. And I'll just say that the challenges seem to be never ending. We didn't get to talk about ransomware or how we deal with those things, but I would say just to the audience who's watching, as I've said many times before, that there's no one entity or individual that is responsible for protecting us against these threats. That we're all in this together. Everybody has a role to play. The importance of practicing good cyber hygiene cannot be underestimated. It's just so important that everyone do their part to make sure that you're doing things like having strong passwords, updating your security patches, encrypting data where possible, having backups on your system so that if you do go down, you can reconstitute quickly, hopefully without having to pay ransom. But these are ongoing challenges that we face not only today, but well into the future. And I look forward to working with everyone to make sure that we do our part to keep the country safe.
Well, I'll just say we've covered a lot today. I think it's been a really engaging discussion. My key takeaway is that we need, of course, to keep working together across public and private sectors to continue to evolve our cyber standards and our approaches to risk management, to keep pace, frankly, with technology advancements and really meet both the challenges and the tremendous opportunities that technology transformation and evolution are providing to us. I think that's probably the key point for me today. Thank you.
And I think most broadly, I would just say, as a CEO of a company with thousands and thousands of employees, change is one thing, culture is another. You can't create sustainable change without sustaining some change in culture. And I think we need to do that. The culture of capitalism, the culture of government, the culture of, frankly, the citizens of the United States. We need to intervene and have more education, more opportunities within the economic fabric and the operational fabric of this country. It is a reimagination in many regards of how we run this country. And I think we need to get about that. It's going to be hard, difficult. We'll have a lot of resistance. We need to get there for the good of the national security.
Well, thank you all to our distinguished panelists for this illuminating discussion, and to our audience for your great questions. And I hope you all have a wonderful and cyber safe weekend. Bye, everyone.